Lovely to have you, thanks. So, firstly, I just want to extend special thanks to our speakers today. A special thanks goes to Frank Pangallo and the SA Best team for introducing this motion before the South Australian Parliament once again. Frank is passionate about journalistic integrity, and his tenacity and dedication to having this motion passed is commendable, so we thank you very much, Frank. We also hope that this won't be the only state parliament in Australia that will be taking up this motion, and we hope that this spreads throughout Australia so we have motions in every state parliament across this country. This motion is an opportunity for South Australia to be recognised as a state that values free speech, free press, democratic rights, and upholds the principles of human rights. It's better to be known for these positive human and social attributes than it is to be known as a state that invests in war, death, destruction, and nuclear. The persecution of Julian Assange for publishing truthful information poses a serious threat to press freedom. The way he has been relentlessly, brutally and publicly silenced can only be seen as a technique to intimidate others from doing the same. It is a frontal assault on press freedom, journalistic integrity, and our right to know what our governments are doing in our name. Governments have no place in censoring, silencing, incarcerating, demonising or isolating any individual or publisher that exposes truthful information that the government doesn't approve of. We can't silence people just because the government wants a different narrative to be sold out to the general public. Such behaviour is a hallmark of a corrupt and tyrannical regime, not of a Western free country. I am very concerned that our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and the Foreign Minister Penny Wong are lying to us about their representations they have made to the US administration. This is alarming, and those in top governmental positions must be held accountable for not only their inaction, but also the lies that they are telling to the public and to other MPs. DFAT and the Foreign Minister Penny Wong have been deliberately spreading misinformation about Julian Assange, not only to the public, but to their own Labor MPs. It is categorically incorrect to say that Mr. Julian Assange has rejected, rescinded or refused consular support. However, this misinformation is being repeated by Penny Wong and her office. The Australian government has not visited Julian Assange since 2019. And the current Labor government hasn't sent anyone to Belmarsh to see Julian at all. That is even though Penny Wong was actually in the UK only about 3-4 weeks ago. She decided to use her time to go and see James Cleverly and to see what we are doing with the soldiers for the new war that they're planning and going into the Ukraine. So that's where she spent her time, in defence and going to see the soldiers, instead of going to see a peaceful truth teller, Julian Assange. Yep. Sorry, I just lost my phone. So the federal, not only that, but the Labor Party, the Federal Labor Party is controlling the South Australian Labor Party vote here today. Shame. This happened back in September 22, and it seems that it may well happen again. How is it that the federal politicians are allowed to interfere with state politics? What is the point of state politicians? at all. We hope that this motion will be passed today as it has the potential to serve as a catalyst for securing the release of Julian Assange and potentially saving his life. This motion would be the first of its kind to be passed in a state parliament in Australia. It is a historic opportunity for the South Australia to lead the way in upholding democratic values, human rights and the freedom of press. In closing, I just want to share a passage from Nils Melzer's book, The Trial of Julian Assange. And for anyone listening, if you can give this to your MP or to your senator or to your local MLC representatives, it's a really good read and it explains so much about the trial of Julian Assange. In 20 years of work with victims of war, violence and political persecution, I have never seen a group of democratic states ganging up to deliberately isolate, demonise and abuse a single individual for such a long time and with so little regard for human dignity and the rule of law.
13 years!
Nils Melzer, the United Nations Rapporteur on Torture and Other Inhumane Treatment. That was one of what he had stated. Okay, enough from me now. I would like to welcome up Stephen Kenny. Stephen Kenny is Julian Assange's lawyer. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Jody. And thank you for all coming. I mean, it really is important on each of these occasions. And I'd particularly like to acknowledge the work Frank and Connie are doing in bringing this again to the South Australian Parliament. And I know that the Labor Party may not support it. And unfortunately, the Labor Party has a very poor history in this matter. They have, in the past, you remember Julia Gillard's comments about the exposure that Julian made of war crimes and other things. You know, she described it as illegal, grossly irresponsible, and referred it off to the Australian Federal Police. Now, not surprisingly, the Australian Federal Police found he committed no crime. And of course, this is the whole thing about Julian's case. He really hasn't committed any crime, because if he had committed a crime, why aren't the editors of the New York Post, the Washington Times and Der Spiegel in jail with him? Because they only published what he did. And in some cases, irresponsibly, when Julian was being responsible and redacting names, they went ahead and still published anyway. So this is a real concern. And we have another concern. We have a Prime Minister who has spoken before the election saying enough is enough and I'm going to do something about this. So effectively, he's made a promise to the Australian people that he is now not delivering on. All he's done is talked about his quiet diplomacy. Well, quiet diplomacy, Mr. Prime Minister, is not a cover for saying and doing nothing. Now, Mr. Prime Minister, when you get to hang out with your mates and you're the only one writing a cheque for $300 billion, surely you might just mention your concern about justice and an Australian citizen and how he's being treated, particularly when he's charged with the crime of espionage by your new best friend, who you're sending all our money to see. Why not raise it? Now, we're told that in Santiago, it was not raised. Albo had. The Prime Minister of the UK, the President of the United States, obviously standing in the same room. They've got to go, well, how about a little discussion about Mr. Assange and the rule of law and truth and justice? But I think it was like, where's your checkbook, mate? Let's see it. So, regretfully, nothing happened. And I'm extremely concerned that if he continues to do nothing, because we are told by American sources that the issue has been raised but not pressed. And so, if that's all they're doing, and the Americans consider it a minor irritant to an otherwise perfectly good relationship where we send money over to them. So, I don't know what sort of relationship you would expect amongst your friends, But if they were my friends, I certainly wouldn't want to hang around with them. So just to give you all a bit of an update of where Julian's up to, as you know, he's still in Belmarsh Prison. On the 11th of April, I think it's the 11th of April, he'll have been there 4 years. He still has significant legal rights in the UK system, a right to challenge his extradition, and they are excellent grounds. I've read them in some detail, and I think ultimately he may well be successful in not being extradited. But the problem he's got is that it's going to be 3 or 4 years before it works its way through the British legal system. I know, it's hardly British justice, or maybe this is British justice. And to give you an example of where we're up to at the moment, he has been given leave to appeal a decision made in, no, he hasn't been given, he's sought leave to appeal a decision that was made in 2020. The judge had all the papers in front of him in November last year. And it's not, he's going to hear an argument, he's doing it what we call on the papers. So that means he has simply got to read through and say, are these reasonably arguable grounds of appeal? Not that they're good, not that they will win, but are they arguable? And the answer is, of course, yes, but he still hasn't made a decision. And then after that, they'll have the appeal hearing, which will take place sometime this year. And then sometime later, there'll be a decision made by a court and then further appeals. So we need something done now. So visit your local MP. Explain to them that Julian's health is not good. He has been suffering quite severely from his years of incarceration, and we need to do something now. So thank you, Frank, thank you, Connie, and thank you for those in the South Australian Parliament who will be voting in favour of this, and I urge all of them to. Thank you.
Now I would like to welcome up Tammy Franks from the Greens. Thank you so much, Tammy.
Thank you, Jodie, and thank you, Stephen, for that great speech and for all the work that you do. I'd like to acknowledge I'm here on Kaurna land and that sovereignty was never ceded, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And it's on that Aboriginal land that we're going to see the real AUKUS outcomes. 20 years ago, as many of us well remember, I was sitting over there actually because I couldn't get anywhere near these steps with the peace protests against the invasion of Iraq. A war based on a lie. A war that we were dragged into because America lied and we believed them. Where we were told there was weapons of mass destruction and that we were on the side of right. Weapons of mass destruction are fear. Fear is a weapon of mass destruction. Lying to your people and to other countries is a weapon of mass destruction. Keeping Julian Assange as an example of what happens if you tell the truth about a government lying to its people and to other countries is a weapon of mass destruction. Apathy, indifference, politicians who don't do their jobs and hold people to account like Rex Patrick does, even though he's no longer a representative paid in the Parliament, but continues to do, and I acknowledge your work there, Rex. 20 years ago, it was a very different world, and what we are seeing now with the AUKUS deal, announced before the last election, but confirmed in writing this week, is yet another example of how we are lied to and how we have fallen for a world where there is no justice because there is no truth. We find out just this weekend that those nuclear-powered submarines, this deal that is going to cost us 600 and I've had flu, sorry people. $368 billion is going to see nuclear waste, high-level nuclear waste disposed of in Australia. Not in the UK, not in the US, here in Australia. Which brings me back to that point. It will be on Aboriginal land, no doubt, that they intend to dump that waste. And they hope that we will not ask any curly questions. And my God, if we ever needed WikiLeaks, and if we ever needed Julian Assange out doing his job, it's to find out what the hell they have signed us up to, and what the hell they expect the Australian people to do. Do they expect us to just sit by idly while they spend up big on more lies, on less truth, on broken promises? And can I say, this country has not had a conversation about AUKUS. The Labor Party itself hasn't had a conversation about AUKUS. As we saw with Paul Keating at the press club in the last few days, he's certainly not been part of any Labor Party decision to go this way on the AUKUS deal. Neither has Peter Garrett. Neither has Doug Cameron. Neither has Albo's own sub-branches, which have all spoken out against the AUKUS deal in the last few days. And I've got to say, they're speaking out with a lack of information, with the sort of information that we should all be exposed to as a community to have a proper conversation in this country, the sort of information that only groups like WikiLeaks have been able to expose in the past. Because if we're going to wait for our government, we're going to be waiting a lot longer than another 20 years to find out actually what we've signed up to with AUKUS. This is why Julian Assange is so important. Julian is a journalist. Journalism is not a crime. Stephen is absolutely right. So why aren't the New York Post, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Washington Post, why aren't the journalists locked up right now? Why aren't the media speaking out more strongly? And why aren't the politicians elected to uphold democracy, protecting the Fourth Estate? Because without the Fourth Estate, we have decisions like the AUKUS deal, where the whole country has no idea what we've actually just signed ourselves up to, where we have signed the future generations of our children, where we have put Aboriginal people right in the firing line to have this nuclear waste dump on their lands without prior and informed consent, and where the people of this country, who are a peaceful nation, have been conscripted to war machinery, to a defence industry based on those war machineries, to private enterprise. None of this is in our national interest. And this same government, Albo, who was going to speak quietly behind the scenes before the last federal election, has been exposed. FOIs have shown there has been no such representations made on Mr. Assange's behalf. This is an Australian who should have been freed years and years and years ago. In fact, it should have been never incarcerated in the embassy to protect himself. This should never have got to this point. But unfortunately, apathy is that weapon of mass destruction, and the government is counting on us forgetting and finding it all too hard. And today, when Frank moves this motion and speaks to it, and the Greens will be supporting him, and I believe One Nation will be supporting him as well, the Labor Party and the Liberal Party are hoping that you all don't pay attention, that you don't continue to press them on this issue, that they can just go and vote, Labor and Liberal on one side, and the crossbenchers on the other, and that this will all go away. Well, I've got to say, bringing it back to the AUKUS issue, the member for Fremantle for the Labor Party on the weekend found out to his detriment that that community is rising up. That community went out door knocking, exposing the AUKUS deal and what we have just signed up for. Do not let them off the hook. Do not let Labor or Liberal off the hook on this. Do not believe their lies, and do not feel defeated because we are small in number here today, because by God, we're not going anywhere and we're not giving up.
Thank you, Tammy, that was amazing. I think just to add to that, also Chelsea Manning, who was actually the whistleblower, has been pardoned, and she's out living her free life. And the publisher of the information, who's Australian, is locked up. So that doesn't make much sense at all. Now we're just going to have a music break. This is Stay Human Project. So we've got Sue, Helen and Phil. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to the Stay Human Project. They're a local group of activists in Adelaide that do an amazing job. So thank you. Give them another big round of applause, please. Amazing. Now I'd like to ask Rex Patrick to come up and speak, please. That'd be amazing. Thank you. Big round of applause for Rex Patrick.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Hard Act to Follow, Stephen, then Tammy, then the band. But I'll try and say something that contributes to this debate. I did come and speak on Sunday, so I'll depart from what I said there. I might just say maybe it's worthwhile declaring my self-interest in this particular campaign. Some of you might know that I was in the federal court in Melbourne the last 2 days with my pro bono barrister up against the senior counsel, junior counsel, commercial lawyers and government instructing solicitors, with the Commonwealth Government saying that in actual fact, when we do freedom of information, so this is a transparency theme, when we do freedom of information requests and we seek to have decisions of agencies appeal, that our Australian Information Commissioner can take as long as she likes in dealing with an FOI. So when you're trying to get access to information about a contemporary issue, it ends up being provided to you as a historical document, and that's simply not how the objectives of our Act, in fact even the South Australian Act, which are there to design to encourage debate, scrutiny of government, input to decisions and policies. I was in the bizarre situation where, when faced with evidence, the judge it was put to the judge that they had done nothing, the Information Commission had done nothing in relation to one of my reviews for 2 years and 4 months. And when the judge said to the Commonwealth, "What do you make of that?" they said, "We think that's a very significant delay, but it's not an unreasonable delay." That is just outright craziness, and I think Stephen probably understands the word unreasonable has a particular legal meaning, but just to the layman, that just is a bizarre concept. I've this morning spoken to Jackie Lambie, I've spoken to Zoe Daniels' office, I've had a chat with David Shoebridge, Senator David Shoebridge from the Greens, and I've also been helping Rebecca Sharkey with some issues. And my big concern is I'm the next target to be extradited to Canberra, okay? And that's what we're here today to talk about. People who are working hard to disclose information. Governments like to control information and release it at a time and in a form that is most suitable to their objectives. And it takes disruptors like Julian Assange, like whistleblowers, like myself doing a lot of FOIs, to upset that status quo and allow us to contribute and observe and criticise and congratulate our governments for what they do. And that's the real problem we've got here, is that Julian Assange, who was a bit of a crusader, he was interested in transparency. He published, in the way that a journalist would, information about governments, about government conduct. I had a News Corp journo last week say to me, "Rex, oh, you're not going to an Assange rally, are you?" And I said, "Hang on a second, mate. If you were writing a story about China and were passing through some South African country, and suddenly there was an extradition treaty from China because of what you had written in the paper, I'd be the first person standing there saying, we have to protect press freedom." And that journalist thought about it for a moment and went, yeah, I guess that's right. We've seen a situation, Stephen's mentioned it, last week we saw a meeting of the 3 key players in all of this for Assange, that is the US President, the UK Prime Minister and our Prime Minister. And we're pretty sure that, we can't say for certain, but we're pretty sure that Julian Assange was not mentioned. It was the perfect forum for that to occur. I've been talking to Barbara Pocock and I will talk to some Teals to maybe get a question asked of the Prime Minister about whether or not that was or was not the case. And I will certainly be FOIing any briefs that the Prime Minister had on Assange as he travelled to meet with the 2 other key players in all of this. And I suspect we'll turn up with nothing. And that's the shame of this. You can't simply say, I'm making representations. I know as a senator, or as a former senator, and someone who dealt in government, When you sit down and talk with someone about an issue, about a serious issue, you always follow it up in writing, laying out what the actions are, what's expected, what everyone's understanding is, and that is simply not happening. There's no representation taking place.
Accountability!
There's a mention, and that's all that's happening. And we need better government than this. We had Anthony Albanese stand up in the House of Representatives in late November and say that that enough was enough, and that he was wanting to see this all come to an end. We've seen that there has been no formal letters between the two countries that deal with Julian Assange. We know, or we're pretty sure, that when Mark Dreyfus called together in February a bunch of journalists to talk about press freedom, the elephant in the room was in fact Julian Assange. And I understand that representations were made by those concerned with Julian Assange to be present, and that they were not permitted to come along to that talk. So you can't talk about press freedom in this country and not involve the words Julian Assange. Those two concepts go together, can't be separated, and we've got to get fair dinkum about this. And sadly, we're not seeing that. We have to keep pressure on all governments to bring attention to this issue and make them uncomfortable such that they act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rex. I would also like to say, in regards to putting pressure on our MPs and our local representatives. So the Assange Campaign Australia has launched their Meet Your MP program. Now, it was launched about 3 to 4 weeks ago. And in that time, we've got over 225 participants across Australia committed to meet their MP. I would really advise anyone that hasn't signed up to do so. But with saying that, I've had a little bit to do with it, and I have been getting lots of phone calls from all these people across Australia saying how difficult it is to get a meeting or even a phone call back from their MPs. Now, I think that's a disgrace. They won't even reply. No, that's right. And if they do, they try and bamboozle you, get you off the phone. And this is terrible, because what our local members of parliament must realise is we're not there for them. They are there for us. They are our representatives. They are meant to be our voice in parliament. They're not just meant to just swan about together and say, oh, this is the narrative we're going to do, so we'll just agree with each other in our little echo chamber. That's not how it works. Even if they don't agree with Julian Assange, if they don't even agree with it, but if they get like a lot of people that say, I'm really concerned, I want you to go into my parliament and say that, they should do that, because they have to represent their constituents. So, please, go and meet your MP. The Meet Your MP program is on the Assange Campaign website. Speak to me after this rally if you want to join. I do have some QR codes over there. But getting active, getting involved is really, really important, because if we lose our freedom of speech, if we lose our press freedom, if we lose our journalists, if we quieten down everybody, our future generations, our children, will have no chance. Okay. Thank you. Now, I would really like to invite up Frank Pangallo. Thanks, Frank. Please give a big round of applause for Frank. Second time we're putting this motion to the South Australian Parliament. You're a legend. Thanks.
Thank you, Jodie. And it won't be the last time I'll bring it before the Parliament. If it fails today, as it's likely to, I'll bring it back again and again and again until they get the message. I just want to acknowledge all the speakers today, starting off with Jodie, of course, who's done a fantastic job with the movement, Free Julian Assange, particularly here in Adelaide. Without people like Jodie, you wouldn't have a voice going and being heard. And it's the same for people like Stephen Kenny, who's given his time and efforts to make sure that, there's rule of law and an expectation that justice prevails for Julian Assange. For Tammy Franks as well, it's great to always have the support of Tammy and the Greens on issues like this, and I thank her, my colleague Connie Benaros, who strongly supports what is happening here today, and of course Rex Patrick. Rex, who's really a warrior when it comes to free speech, accountability and transparency. And I'll get to this, I won't go through any of what you've heard about what they've been doing to Julian and why he did it. Why I'm interested in it, a journalist asked me, well, why are you taking an interest in it? Well, I'm taking an interest in it because I'm a journalist. And if that material came to me, I wouldn't hesitate in publishing it. The last thing I would expect is to be put behind bars for exposing crime. Journalists should not be jailed for exposing crimes. And it really is a suppression of free speech and a suppression of the press. So I'm pretty vocal on it, and I will maintain my passion to ensure that the rights of Julian Assange are heard and that he's released from Belmarsh and that the extradition doesn't take place. As for Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong, well, all we've heard are weasel words from Albo. You can see that the only thing missing from that picture, and of course it was taken after Albo borrowed Joe Biden's rose-coloured Ray-Bans, and I just wonder whether he said something to him then. The only thing missing from there is they're not licking Joe Biden's boots, because what they've become is nothing more than lapdogs for the United States. That's what they are, they're lapdogs for the United States. And unfortunately that doesn't augur well for Julian, because they don't want to rattle the cage of the big eagle. But nonetheless, this fight will continue. And you may be small in number today, but your voices are loud. And those voices need to continue to be heard. And I'll make sure that they're heard in Parliament, and hopefully it'll be heard in the federal Parliament. Today I'll be disappointed in Labor and the Liberals, particularly the Liberals who are trying to push a bill currently before Parliament calling for transparency and accountability in government. I mean, this is the ultimate hypocrisy. When you have somebody like Julian Assange doing what he did, holding governments accountable, transparency, and a whistleblower gets jailed. And here we have the Liberals here at the height of hypocrisy. So, as for their bill, well, they can just wait on that one. And Labor, disappointing. One would think this is a party that champions the right of free speech in our democratic state, and it doesn't. So it doesn't really stand for what it claims it stands for. So make sure that you remember them and write to them, as Jodie is trying to do. And it's a disgrace that MPs are refusing to even meet with constituents to discuss an issue that's important to them. With that, thank you again for coming out. We'll see you at the next one, and when I put my next motion up. Thank you, Jodie.
Well, again, I want to thank you all for coming out. I see a lot of faces that I know very well and others that I don't, but this is a really growing community in Adelaide, and South Australia has always been a fantastic community for speaking out and getting active. So we really need to build on this community. So if you want to join Adelaide for Assange, Amnesty International, State Human Project, or any other thing, group, please do. Tammy, Stay Human Project. Without people like this, you know, our democratic system would completely fall to pieces. So get active, get involved and get vocal. Have a nice day. Thank you so much. Thank you.